Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at one of the prototypes that's come out from the Royal box for 2024, and that is going to be the Strive, a new 13-speed coming out to the lineup in 2024. Now, if you haven't checked already, I did do a review on the Brave. It was the 7-speed prototype that came in the same box that I got from Latitude a little bit early from their brand coordinator, Johannes Hagberg. So now we're taking a look at the Strive, and the Strive supposedly, while we have no flight numbers yet, is supposed to be a 13-speed, so comparable to the Rive as far as rim width and speed, but it's supposed to be a more understable complement to the Rive. So I do have the Strive here. I do have a Royal Rive, which the Royal Rive in its normal plastic is a little bit straighter than the Orbit Rives you're seeing pros use. The Orbit Rive is a little bit more overstable, and it's kind of a dependable distance driver for a lot of Trilogy players. You'll see a lot of them throwing on Orbit Rive, but I have just the base plastic Rive. So I thought that was a fair comparison for the normal version of the Royal Strive. And then to kind of compare it to some other discs from Trilogy, I do have a couple of Trespasses and a couple of Raiders, just to kind of see, you know, where it fits into the lineup of like those 12 and 13 speed type drivers from Trilogy. I also may throw a Sword or something in there at some point if I feel like the Strive's flying really understable on me. It's worth noting on these first throws, I am throwing into a slight headwind, probably about 10 miles per hour, but I'll also throw these discs on a tailwind back this direction to kind of give it a fair assessment. Note, I am human, I'm not a robot, so I may not throw these properly. I'm having a tendency to kind of come over the top on them a little bit and get a little bit more Anheuser or like a little bit more force over than normal. So I'll try my best not to do that, but you know, the camera's not gonna lie, you'll be able to see it. But we're gonna start with the Rive, throw this one first into this headwind, kind of get a feel for how it flies. We'll throw the Strive next, and then we'll throw some Trespasses and some Raiders to just kind of get some comparisons. All right, gonna start with the Rive first. I'll also say that these wide rim drivers like 13 speed sometimes are just a little bit tough for me to get a grip on. That's why I typically throw like 11 or 12 speeds. But I will say this for a 13 speed, this doesn't feel nearly as wide as like say a Nuke or something that's like extremely wide, or like a Ballista Pro, which is a 14 speed. It's a little bit less than that hand feel wise, so it's a little more comfortable for me. But still not as comfortable as like a Sword or something a little bit less of a wide rim. So I felt like I threw that pretty flat, and despite the headwind, it still flew straight and had some fade. And that's kind of what I expect from my arm speed with the Rive. I know higher arm speeds can get a little bit more turn out of those, and that's why they usually use the Orbit version of the Rive to have something with a little bit more stable. But for me, even in a headwind, it flew straight, didn't really want to flip or turn right too much, and then it essentially still had a dependable fade. So that's kind of what I expected, even with it being a headwind. Let's compare that to the Strive. Definitely more turn. I mean, it's very apparent. Even throwing that slightly nose up, it had more turn than the Rive, I thought, with a better nose angle. So definitely a little bit more understable. Let's compare it to some Trespasses here. I do have a Supreme Trespass, so this should be the same plastic type, right? Like the Supreme is literally just DD's version of Royal. So this should be the same plastic type as the Strive, but in a Trespass. So as you can see, that Supreme Trespass thrown into a slight headwind definitely had some good turn to it most of the flight. But because of that Supreme plastic, did actually have more integrity and was able to come out of that turn and kind of flatten out, even get a touch of finish. It was actually very similar to the Strive in my opinion. It's just the difference was the Strive, I threw a little bit higher in the air and I didn't have as good of a nose angle on it. But it felt pretty similar, honestly, as far as like flight goes. I think on a tail end, we'll definitely see that. But now I got a couple of Raiders I'll throw. So a couple of things there. That disc had some turn to it, similar to the Supreme Trespass, but had more finish, that's for sure. Maybe not as much turn. And I think part of it is maybe to the nose angle I released it on. But the Raider is a faster disc than the Trespass, which means you need more arm speed to get it up to speed, if you try to see what I'm getting at. And so I don't have that great of arm speed. I throw like on average 300 feet. Every now and then I'll push like 330, 340. Absolute max is like 360, 370 if everything goes perfect, and that's very rare. So yeah, the Strive to me, just based on initial flights, and I have thrown a couple off camera as well just to get like a basic feel for it, it feels a lot like Latitude 64's version of a Raider, which a Raider is definitely a little bit more flippy than a Rive. It's a little bit more understable, not by much, but definitely a tick. At lower arm speeds, you probably wouldn't notice a crazy difference, but for pros, definitely. And so I feel like the Strive might just kind of be Latitude 64's version of a Raider, almost, where it's gonna have a straighter to slightly more understable flight than a Rive, and be that understable complement in that same 13-speed slot. We're gonna throw one more Raider. This is the hybrid Raider. So yeah, that Raider into a headwind, got a little bit of turn, but still came out of it, flattened out, got a little bit of finish. Flew very similar to the Fusion Raider, kind of what I expected, just based on it being a little bit beat in and not much of a weight difference, and we're still dealing with that headwind. So yeah, so far on these headwind throws, the Strive, definitely more understable than the Rive, and kind of comparable to the Raider, but was more stable than the Trespass by just a smidge, not by much. But the Trespass is a slightly slower disc, so it takes a little bit less arm speed to get the right flight out of it. So you have to kind of factor that all in. But now we're gonna throw some shots into the tailwind back towards this direction and try to get some comparisons there as well. All right, so for distances on those throws, the Rive went the shortest, about 275 to 280. Then the furthest flyers were the Raider and the Supreme Trespass. These were both like 325-ish. And the Strive was only about maybe 5 to 10 feet shorter than the Supreme Trespass and the Raider. So got some pretty similar distance, definitely pushed further than the Rive. Definitely had a little bit more flip up than the Rive. Definitely was that understable complement that they're looking for that Rive mold. So now we're gonna be throwing a slight tailwind. We're about 315 feet away from my cart down there. And we're gonna throw the Rive first. We're gonna throw the Strive right next to it to see that comparison. And then I'll throw the Trespasses and one of my Raiders just so you can kind of see some of the similarities and differences, as I feel like this Strive, being a more understable complement to the Rive, is kind of similar to a Trespass or a Raider type disc. So we're gonna start with the Rive first. Now again, this is a tailwind, and so I expect the Rive to fight pretty hard. I don't expect to get like a crazy distance out of this or much flip at all. So as I feared, I think I kind of forced that over a little bit. Only you'll know when you watch back the video in slow-mo or something to see if I did. But either way, in this tailwind, that disc just flew straight and faded. There was really no turn to it. There was a little bit of flip up, maybe, but that might have been more because I might have forced it over a little bit as opposed to it actually wanting to flip up. Again, the film will tell the story. I can't know for sure. I'm an AM, I'm not a robot, I'm not a pro. I only throw about 300, 330 feet. Arm speed's not the best, technique's not the best. So again, human error is definitely in effect here. But with that Rive, it did not really want to turn in this tailwind. It really just kind of wanted to fly straight and then fade out. But I think I got about the 315 distance, or pretty close to it. Let's try the Strive. I'm trying to throw it as similar as I can to that Rive. So here's the deal. I threw that disc a fair amount lower than the Rive. We can all agree to that. But what we also have to all agree to is when you watch the fly of that disc, even though I threw it lower than the Rive, it definitely had some turn to it, even in a tailwind. So it is definitely that more understable complement to the Rive. There's no doubt about it now. Like, it's very clear to me that's what it does. And with the skips I got, it did push past the cart to probably about 320, 325. But I do think that if I would have thrown it a touch higher, I would have been able to still get that 320 distance or so, even without skips, and with some skips, maybe 330, 340. So For me, with the Rive being an overstable distance driver for my arm speed, the Strive definitely has that flip to it. Definitely is that more understable, a little bit more glide, a little bit more push, get a little bit more distance. So if you're someone who has tried the Rive and you like the feel of it, but it's a little too overstable for you, or maybe you do bag it as your like kind of dependable overstable driver, but you want something a tick less stable, the Strive's gonna be that for you. But I will throw a Supreme Trespass and a Raider just to kind of compare it. So this is the Trespass. Supreme plastics are the same plastic as the Strive and the Rive I just threw. Also, saying Strive and Rive next to each other, maybe the naming scheme could have been a little bit better on that. I like the idea of wanting to kind of make the names close so that people can kind of tell, oh, they're kind of related to each other, but it's a little bit of a tongue twister. Let's go to the Trespass. Slight tailwind. Very similar to the Strive, very similar. I got more height on that Trespass, so it flew a little different. It had more fade to it, but I imagine if I threw the Strive higher, it would have gotten similar fade to that Trespass considering the tailwind. So to me, I know it's hard to just see it on camera always, but from just a feel perspective, and even from some off-camera throws that I've done when I first got the disc and I was just kind of testing them out before I filmed the review, that Supreme Trespass and that Royal Strive are very similar. Now I'm gonna throw this hybrid Raider. I don't think they've made their Raider in Supreme plastic yet. I know it's had a bunch of other crazy plastics, but I don't think it's been in Supreme yet. But this is a hybrid, so it's a mix of Fusion and Lucid. Okay, so that Raider more stable than the Strive. And I think it has a lot to do with it just being a faster Trespass, so a little bit wider rim, not as much comfort throwing it, and the tailwind maybe being a little bit more significant on that throw compared to the others. But yeah, I would put the Strive very close to that Trespass. It's not as understable as a sword. I feel like if I threw one of my swords, it would have more turn than those do, but it's very similar to the Trespass, but definitely not as overstable as the Rive. Yeah, so in a tailwind, I'm just not getting much turn on those Raiders, and I think part of it is I'm just not throwing them that well. Maybe I'm also getting a little bit tired because I've been throwing all these shots, and I just filmed the whole review for the Brave at the same time I'm doing this. So it could be a mix of just being a little bit tired, running back and forth, fetching disc, and throwing a lot of shots. But I think this tailwind is pretty significant, so it's not really letting the disc flip over as much if they're on the more neutral side of things. However, that Strive being a little more understable, it definitely had some flip to it even in a tailwind. Definitely, my conclusion has to be that the Strive has hit the goal that Latitude set forth in the communications they put out when they released this disc, or at least are releasing the Royal box that this is going to be in. And that is that they want the Strive to be a more understable complement to the Rive, and it is. It's very clear in the headwind and tailwind throws that I did today with those discs that the Rive really just wanted to kind of push forward and then fade out. Even in a headwind, there wasn't much turn. I still kind of just wanted to go straight and push out. But the Strive, even when I threw it slightly nose up in the headwind, it still wanted to turn. And then when I threw it in this tailwind, even though I threw it kind of low, it still had some turn to it that the Rive did not have. And to me, it was pretty similar to a Trespass. You know, it wasn't as understable as that really beat in hybrid Trespass that was turning a ton, but it was very similar to the Supreme Trespass. They were both getting a little bit of turn and then they were fighting out, whereas the Rive was just going straight and fading out. So basically, to wrap it all up, I say mission accomplished if that's what Latitude was going for. They have created a 13-speed disc that is a little bit more flippy than the Rive. And to me, it's comparable to, say, a Trespass from Dynamic Disc. It's not as understable as a sword. Those are a little bit more flippy than a Trespass, in my opinion. I throw them a lot. But it definitely kind of has that Trespass vibe to it. I would say the Raider, it may also be a similar disc to the Strive, depending on the plastic type and your arm speed. But for me, the Raiders flew a little more overstable than the Strive, so maybe even a tick down from that. I will say the Strive's not as understable as something like a Captain or like a Renegade or some of these flippier distance drivers from DD. I would also say it's probably even more flippy than the Grace. I think sometimes people think the Grace is super understable. It's really not. The Grace is kind of like a Wraith to me, just straight and a little bit of fade. with higher arm speeds, it can flip up quite a lot. But for people like me with more average arm speeds, I would say the Strive, even though it's faster, is still a little bit flippier than the Grace. So that's kind of my conclusions. Again, I'm a human, I'm an AM, I'm not a robot. I can't throw perfectly, but based on my throws on camera and off camera, yeah, I think if the ride's too overstable for you, try the Strive. If you like the ride for that overstable slot, but you want something a little bit flippier to complement it, the Strive's a great option. If you can't get your hands on a Strive and you want something kind of similar to what I experienced with the Strive, I would say try a Trespass. I think that's a good option. If you want something even flippier than that, try a Sword, if you want to stay that trilogy lineup. But anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Hope you folks enjoyed it. Catch you next time.